She turned to Minnie. "Honey, I'm gonna have to be getting on. I know I got a lot of explaining to do, so I think I better get on home." She stood up and opened her purse. "Porky, how much is a half a fourth?"
$30, Terry. But for you, baby, I'll let you have it for 25.
Terry counted the money out slowly. Remembering the promise she had made herself earlier, she justified her behavior by telling herself she would slowly cut down her wage until she could buy some medicine to help her kick. Porky disappeared into the bedroom. After closing the door behind him, he removed a small piece of tinfoil and began dumping a measured amount of dope into it. Then he took some pure heroin, uncut, and sprinkled it on top of the amount he had already measured out, making it extra strong. Smokey, sitting on the bed staring into space, watched his movements indifferently. She knew what he was doing and why he was doing it, and had she attempted to think about it, she would have known what girl he was fixing the potion for. When he finished, he pointed towards the dope.
"Don't collect but $25 for it. It goes to Terry."
Smokey carried out the dope and gave it to Terry. Terry turned around to call Minnie, but changed her mind. With the help of another addict, Minnie had got a hit up under her armpit, and now she was too involved in shooting the heroin to be disturbed. After paying for the dope, Terry started towards the door. Big Ed, one of Porky's protectors, got up to let her out. The gun resting under his left arm swung conspicuously as he leaned down and peeked through a peephole in the door before allowing her to leave. Big Ed was only one of the gunmen that Porky hired to protect him from the addicts. Without protection, the addicts would have stuck him up every day without fail. Most of the time, his gunmen would be addicts who were known for being vicious and who had the nerve to shoot if so pressured. He kept them supplied with drugs and enough money to take care of their personal needs. Most of the time, they just stayed there with him, not bothering to go elsewhere to sleep. None of them worked regular hours. They would just rotate as the mood hit them. Whenever they felt like it was getting time for a fix, they would trade places with one of the gunmen who had been up all night. That was the main thing about Porky's dope house. It never closed. Dope was sold 24 hours a day. Terry made her way down the stairs. She staggered when she got to the bottom. "Damn," she murmured. "This show is a good blow." She made her way to her car and pulled away from the curb slowly. As she drove towards home, she continued to reject one lie after another. Finally, she decided to play it by ear. The dope in her system gave her not only courage, but also a feeling of not really caring what her parents thought about her losing her job. She stopped at a red light and lit a cigarette. Before the light changed, she had dropped the cigarette in her lap twice. Her eyes tried to close, but she fought the desire to nod and drove slowly on. She parked in front of her house and climbed out. There was no worry now, only a desire to get an unpleasant chore over with. When she entered the house, her parents were sitting in the front room, waiting for her. They stared at her curiously. She leaned against the wall and stared back at them. Her father had a solemn look on his face, while her mother seemed to be on the verge of crying at any moment. Her father cleared his throat.
"Terry, we want you to explain what the hell is going on. Mrs. Breeding called and told us some very unpleasant news, and we'd like to hear your side of this."
"I knew it! I knew it!" Terry shrilled. "Before you even hear my side of it, you've taken Mrs. Breeding's word for what happened. Now, honey," Terry's mother said soothingly, "your father hasn't accused you of anything, dear. All he did was ask you your side of it." Cold and calculating, Terry stared at her parents. She knew she had her mother won over already, and she could see in her father's face that he wished he were at work or anywhere else except facing his daughter down at this moment. She changed her tactics. Her voice became wheedling. "I didn't do nothing but try and help this girl I used to go to school with, Daddy. She came in the store, and I could see she was sick, you know. I think she uses that stuff. You know, what they call it, dope." Terry could tell by their faces that they were buying it wholeheartedly. "Well, anyway, Mother, the girl was pregnant, and I felt sorry for her. So when she put these dresses in her box, I couldn't bring myself to call the floor walker on her. So I just let her go. She stopped to catch her breath. Her parents' faces were shining with hope. They wanted to believe her so badly that for a moment she felt regret. She had never before resorted to lies when dealing with her parents, but then she had never before been strung out on dope. For a moment she felt like throwing herself in her mother's arms and telling her all of it, how she wished she were a young girl again, so she could lie in her father's protecting arms with no worry in the world. Her mother spoke up hesitantly. "Mrs. Breeding gave us the impression that it was a little different, Terry." A flash of anger shot through her. For a second, she really believed she was the injured one. "Mrs. Breeding, huh?" Terry caught herself in time. She had almost said shit. "I'll tell you about Mrs. Breeding. Do you know how many times I've seen her catch white girls stealing and let them go?" She stared at her mother and saw her nod her head in agreement. "You know about that, don't you, Mother? I know she's told you about it when you're on the phone gossiping." Her mother came to Mrs. Breeding's defense, as Terry knew she would. "Now, Terry, you know she lets young colored girls go, too, if she believes they've been scared enough." Terry snorted. "Well, she didn't want to let this young, pregnant colored girl go today." She turned to her father. "Anyway, Daddy, you know what I mean. You run into the same thing out there where you work. White people do what they want to do, while you do what they tell you to do." Her father nodded his head. You would have to go to another planet to find a black person who didn't know about discrimination. For the past 15 years, he had been trying to get the crane operator job in his factory, but he was always refused. He had been complaining for the last 10 years that it was because of his color. "Well, that about covers it, Daddy. If I had been a white girl instead of just some poor black nigger, they wouldn't have done anything, just chewed me out about it." With the timing of a good diplomat, she had used the one word she knew would make her father angry enough to change the whole subject.
"Terry, you know what I've told you about using that word,"
he said, his neck muscles swelling from anger.
"Don't nobody but common-ass Negroes use that word in regards to themselves. It takes the lowest form of humanity to be stupid enough to call themselves something that the dictionary defines as lowlife."
Suddenly ashamed at having cursed in front of the two women he loved more than life itself, he walked over and patted his daughter affectionately, but clumsily, on the shoulder.
"Don't worry about a thing, Terry. You can find another job whenever you get ready. And if you don't want to work, we'll make out."
She turned quickly and started for the stairs. She didn't want them to see the tears that sprang up in her eyes. As she stumbled up the stairway, she felt disgusted with herself. How could she deceive them like that? When she reached the top of the stairs, tears were running down her cheeks unchecked. Terry sat on her bed, her head bowed, completely ashamed of her behavior. As if with a will of their own, her fingers began to move toward her purse, and before she was fully aware of it, she had taken out her package of heroin and opened it. Using a fingernail file, she scooped up a large amount of the white poison and snorted it. She seemed to be watching her motions from a distance outside her body. It was as though someone else were snorting the drug, and she was just an innocent bystander. She failed to notice the opening of the bedroom door as she continued to snort the dope. She drifted into another world, free of worry and responsibility. Her eyes had become small pinpoints, while her spirit took off in a flight of euphoria. Her father's shocked voice brought her back to reality.
"What is that stuff? What in the world are you doing? Terry! Terry, my Terry! You can't be using dope!"
He continued, seeing it before his eyes, but not yet wanting to believe what he saw.
"My God, this can't be you, Terry! Why, some kid brought up in the slum, yes, I could understand that, but not you, Terry! Not you! Why, you ain't never wanted for nothing. I used to work 2 jobs so that you and your mother could have anything you wanted."
Tears began to run down his face. His voice became hoarse, and then finally, anger came.
"Give me that stuff, Terry! Give it here!"
Terry moved as though her world was crashing down. She jumped to the end of the bed, clutching the heroin to her bosom. Her eyes were dilating with fear, while her nose seemed to expand with each breath. Her mother stood against the door, Staring dumbfounded, her hand clutching at her heart, she repeated over and over, as though it were a song, "It ain't true, honey. Not my little girl. Tell me it ain't true." Consumed by anger, her father snarled at her.
"You no good little bitch! Then it was all true. Every goddamn word of it was true, and you come in here telling your goddamn lies, and we believe every word of it."
Father and daughter stared at each other across the room. Terry, out of fear of losing the small amount of heroin that promised her she wouldn't wake up sick, didn't even think about trying to use reason with him.